Welcome back to another episode of the Movie Tier List, the second one to be, in fact. Today we're going to be focusing on the second biggest movie franchise that I've watched, that being the Marvel Cinematic Universe, aka the MCU. I'm going to be going in chronological order in terms of the movie releases, except for one of them, and you'll see why. But just a fair spoiler warning, I've seen a lot of these, and I recognize that some of you might not have. And while I'm not going to go too much in depth in the plot lines, and more so my opinions, I will still be discussing some of the major plot points. So just warning, if you haven't seen these, you might want to skip this part. Let's begin with the first MCU movie, Iron Man. Here we have the origins of Iron Man, aka Tony Stark, and his character arc is the longest and most interesting in the entirety of the MCU. Even though it takes him multiple movies to go through his entire change as a character, you can even see its beginnings in this movie, and I think it's pretty interesting to watch, actually. We see him evolve from this selfish billionaire into this guy who just sees what all of his creations and inventions are doing on the other sides of the world. And while that is an interesting plot point, unfortunately, in this movie, it's like the only interesting thing that happens. I don't think the villain is really anything noteworthy, other than the fact that he's just some guy who was mad at him for something, I don't remember. But I think Iron Man's story holds this movie up well enough for me to put it into B tier. It's a pretty good start for their first movie. Now we have the Incredible Hulk. And I'd like to say that their incredible start has now no longer become an incredible start because this movie was pretty boring. A big aspect of this movie's failure, from my perspective, is that it doesn't have a lot of bearing on the MCU as a whole. Not even the actor who plays the Hulk in this movie shows up anymore. They replaced him with Mark Ruffalo. And Hulk doesn't really have much of a character arc throughout the MCU, so just seeing him kind of sort of develop one and then be forgotten in this movie is just... it doesn't really leave for a movie that's worth rewatching, especially when you consider that it has no impact on the grand scale of the movie. I'm going to place this in D tier. It was not horrible, but I probably won't be watching it again unless I feel like I want to. Speaking of mediocre, we have Iron Man 2. I didn't particularly like this one either, actually. This movie does have some cool scenes, I will admit, like that scene where Tony is fighting with Rhodey to Daft Punk, which was kind of cool, but that's really the only part of the movie that I remember. The villain doesn't really have any bearing on the story until like the last 20 minutes or so, and not a lot really happens throughout the movie's runtime anyway. A lot of the movie is just the villain rambling to another villain, and then I think Tony Stark is going through something, but again, it wasn't very memorable. I'm also going to put this one in D tier. And now we have the first Thor movie, which unfortunately, I gotta say, they're not really doing too good with these first movies aside from Iron Man. So in this movie, we get introduced to Thor and how his hammer works, and a lot of the movie is just filler. The entire plot point is that he just gets sent to Earth, and the people that he finds are like, whoa, he's a very strange guy, but I think he's insane. And then this girl is like, oh, I love him. And then he's like, oh, well, I don't really care. And then I think he starts caring at some point. I don't remember. Anyway, that plot point wasn't really that interesting. And Thor isn't really likable character in this movie, but I guess it kind of makes sense because we're starting to understand him more. But it didn't feel very convincing that he was becoming more selfless at the end of this movie, because they just end up fighting a giant robot, and he's like, you know what, I'll fight the giant robot myself. And then he freaking dies or something. I will give the movie this. There is one scene where Thor gets sent down to Earth, and he's looking for his hammer, and when he finds it, he thinks he could pick it up because, you know, only Thor can pick it up. But then when he realizes he can't, he thinks he's not worthy, and then he's really sad. And I'm kind of playing it off as this silly scene, but it is actually pretty well done if you were to watch it in the movie. And honestly, if you were to just watch that scene, you could skip the rest of it aside from knowing that he lives. I'm going to put this movie in D tier, but just know that because of that one scene, it's probably higher than a lot of these other D tier movies, but it was still pretty boring, and I probably will still forget everything that happened, because I did. Captain America is a much better improvement from the previous three films. For starters, Steve Rogers, otherwise known as Captain America, is a pretty likable character on his own. So even though he doesn't change too much throughout the MCU's runtime, it's nice to see the origins of his nice, kind of selfless, and stand up for the small guy character archetype shown in this movie. And something that is actually pretty cool as well is that it sets up plot points that will be revisited in future movies, which I think is actually pretty cool. And it makes revisiting this one a lot more satisfying because I can say, oh, hey, that's going to show up later in this much better movie. But this one is still pretty good too. Some things I don't like about the movie is that some of the action scenes aren't entertaining to watch. They're just kind of boring. And the ending of the movie, when Captain America gets stuck in the ice, I felt like it was a bit forced. Aside from that, I think the rest of the movie is pretty good. I think it's a good movie. It really illustrates the strongest part of Captain America's character. I'm going to put this one right up there with Iron Man in B tier. And now we have Avengers 1, the OG crazy beat-up film, where you saw these characters from all these different franchises, and even some who we've never met before, show up in this brand new adventure where they fight crime together. And I gotta say, like, I know this movie's old, and maybe the crazy meetup thing is overdone, especially when at this point when like the multiverse is a thing now. But I still love this movie, dude. I feel like a lot of modern crossovers aren't as genuine as they are in this movie. And that's because not only do a lot of the characters and the way they act contradict each other, but also the protocols and the way they deal with stuff clash with one another. So when, say, Iron Man or Captain America want to catch Loki, who's the villain, Thor comes over and he's like, dude, that's my brother. We have to deal with him in Asgard. And then Iron Man's like, no, we have to arrest him. And it's just an interesting conflict. There's some really cool fight scenes. I think this movie's pretty freaking cool. I don't care if it does an overdone trope that's seen a lot in later movies. I think it was really well done in this movie, so I really, really love it. I'm going to put it in A tier. It is just a genuine joy to watch. And that is the end of Marvel's first phase. Now you may be thinking to yourself, what are phases? I don't really know how to explain it. They're kind of just chapters in the movie timeline. Just think of it like a book. So this is chapter 2. It's phase 2. They just call it phase because it's a cooler word, but I think chapter is a cooler word. Even though I don't read books. I should probably read books. Iron Man 3! So after watching phase 1, I realized that there was a lot of movies that weren't really that great. I'd say it was half good, half not good. And I gotta say, starting off with Iron Man 3, that's pretty good, man. Iron Man 3 is easily my favorite Iron Man. First of all, I really like the fight scenes in this movie. They feel very unique for this character. A lot of them have him dealing with scenarios where he only has part of his Iron Man suit or where he doesn't have any of his Iron Man suit and yet he still has to fight these like alien fire things or fire people. And it's really cool to watch. Not only that, but I think this one shows one of the biggest stepping stones in Iron Man's story. In this movie, we get to see him become more of that family man that we see him later on in the MCU. And this is the origins of that, where we see him sacrifice some of his technology in his Iron Man suits in order to make his wife, Pepper Potts, feel more safe. And honestly, it's just really good, man. I'm going to put this one in A tier along with Avengers. It's easily the best Iron Man movie. Okay, now we have Thor, The Dark World. All right, so basically this one's pretty much as inconsequential to the movie franchise as the first Thor was, except in this one, there isn't that cool he can't lift a hammer scene. There is a scene where his mom dies, and I think that's kind of sad, but she wasn't really a big character in either movie. I know Loki has character development in this movie, but as you'll see later on, that doesn't really matter. So I'm going to put this movie in D tier because it's another not great movie. It's not terrible, again, because these movies are terrible, but this movie is just not very good. I'd skip this one, honestly. You really don't need to watch it. Captain America, The Winter Soldier. Now this is what I'm talking about. I think this was the first Marvel movie that I'd ever watched any footage of, except maybe the first Avengers, but this was one of the first ones that I'd ever been exposed to. And it was awesome. Every time I saw it, I was just in awe of how cool it was. Now, I haven't really brought this up much, but I have to mention the score in this movie sets up the tension really well. A specific motif plays every single time the so-called Winter Soldier shows up, and it just sets him up to be this really scary villain. And not only that, but he just is scary. He's terrifying. And it works well with Captain America's character, not only because it's a force that he can deal with because it's just a guy with a metal arm, but it also turns out it was his friend from the 30s when he was in the 30s. So they're both 100 years old, but now he has to fight him. And that's cool. That's a cool conflict. It's a pretty good reveal, by the way, because you don't expect it, because you think, oh, that guy's definitely dead because it's been 100 years, but now he's alive. And it's so cool because that's like his only sense of reality that comes back. And it's just amazing. The only thing I'll say is this. There's this character called Nick Fury, and he's like the leader of organization of the Avengers team. I think he brings them all together, basically. And they do this weird thing where he almost dies, but then he comes back to life because somebody showed up and then they saved his life by giving him a heart-slowing serum. And then he was able to fake his death, but stay alive. That part was just kind of weird to me, but that's the only complaint I have about this movie. This one is really cool. It's going up in A tier. And here we have it. The cream of the crop. Guardians of the Galaxy. This isn't your average MCU movie. This one focuses a lot more on the artistic representation. Not only does it use dialogue and actions made by the characters to portray how they are, but it also uses nuanced things like camera angles, music choices, and the like. I think it's really cool. Not only is this cast of characters really fun to watch banter with each other and really likable, but the movie itself is just an artistic representation of how to make a really cool movie. I'm going to put it in A tier. I think it is pretty fantastic. And now we have Age of Ultron. And I have to say, I have really mixed opinions about this movie. Because on the one hand, we get some really good character interactions and scenes in this movie. A great example being quite possibly one of the best Marvel scenes I've probably ever watched. That being where all of the other Avengers are trying to pick up Thor's hammer, only to realize that they can't. Not only is that just a funny scene, but it also does well to set up the characters and who they are. And there's a lot of scenes like that where the Avengers are just talking to each other and it reveals their deeper character and it kind of humanizes them more. And I think that's a pretty cool and interesting thing about it. However, when it comes to a lot of the superhero part, it falls flat a little bit. There's a lot of aspects in this movie that I think are just kind of ignored in later films. Like there's this weird setup between Black Widow and the Hulk where they're like randomly really good friends. That's just kind of a this movie thing. And then there's these two new characters that are introduced, Wanda and Quicksilver, and they're really cool. But then Quicksilver freaking dies because he gets shot, even though he can move at the speed of light. Maybe not the speed of light, maybe just the speed of sound. But I want you to think about why that is a bit ridiculous. And I think the villain is just kind of not interesting. He just wants to kill everyone because he doesn't like people. And he's just not a really interesting character to watch, especially since this is the only movie that he has any influence in at all. So I'm going to put it in C tier because there's a lot of things in the movie that I really like watching. But then I'll get to some parts and I'll be like, okay, I'll just watch something else because there's much better things that I could be doing with my time, like watching freaking Bug's Life. And then we have Ant-Man. And, you know, I gotta say, it's fine. There's not really a lot to this movie, but there's not a lot from this movie. It's not bad, but it's not particularly good. It's just okay. I feel like the main purpose of this movie was just to introduce Ant-Man and the idea of quantum physics because that'll become really important later on. But as a standalone movie, it's just okay. I'm gonna put it in C tier. You know, it's not too interesting, but it's not bad. It's not like boring like some of the other ones. So that's good. And that was phase 2. Much better than the first phase, in my opinion, at least from what I've seen. I mean, there were some pretty good movies in phase 1, but this one definitely had some better bangers than phase 1 did. So, let's move on to the third and probably most popular phase, phase 3. Captain America: Civil War. Now in this movie, there's a civil war between the Avengers because they can't decide whether or not they want to agree to this amendment from the government. Basically what the amendment is saying is that the government will be in charge of whether they can deploy the Avengers or not because they're causing too much destruction. And Captain America's like, no, we gotta be available right on time or else too much damage will be done. And then Iron Man's like, no, dude, because in Age of Ultron, we dropped a building on some guy and killed a bunch of people and that was all my fault. And it's a pretty interesting conflict because it's hard to disagree with either of them. And you can see where they're both coming from due to their experiences as superheroes. Which is why it's a bit upsetting that they dropped that plot point halfway through the movie. That Accord, that amendment just disappears off the face of the earth and it becomes just kind of a sequel to the Winter Soldier. And while I still think that some of the Winter Soldier stuff is a little interesting, it's a bit disappointing to see them drop that really interesting plot point. But I mean, hey, this one has the airport scene where all of the guys are fighting against each other. And even if it's a bit contradictory to the story that came before it and it kind of drops the whole thing, I mean, it's still a fight scene between all of the superheroes. Oh yeah, and Spider-Man shows up in this one, which is kind of weird actually. I don't know why he shows up here and not earlier. Maybe I think earlier would have probably been a better point, because this one he just kind of shows up to beat up Captain America and then leaves. So yeah, I think this movie would have been a lot better if they focused on some of the more amendment stuff. But as is, it's still a fine movie. It still has cool action sequences. The Winter Soldier is still a big aspect, and I still think he's pretty cool. So I'm gonna put this movie in B tier, but just know it would have been a lot higher, maybe S tier material, if they focused more on that dropped plot line. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I don't have a lot to say about this one that I haven't already said about the first movie. It does a lot of the same great artistic choices that the first movie does, but it has a different plot line. And it's about as interesting. I'd say more so because the villain in the first movie wasn't really that great, but here it's a lot better, I gotta say. Not that that's a huge difference, but it still, in my opinion, puts this one over the first one. But other than that, I have nothing new to add. So I'm gonna put this movie in A tier. Just know that these two are pretty close in quality. And now we have Spider-Man's first proper film in the MCU, Spider-Man Homecoming. Yeah, if you couldn't tell, I really like this movie. I also just really like Spider-Man. So in the MCU, not only does Spider-Man have to deal with like his own struggles as being a kid, but also a superhero, but he also has to deal with the expectations that bigger superheroes with greater powers and more experience are in the same world as him, so they're more able to deal with the problems than he is. I think that's an interesting conflict, especially since Iron Man serves as his mentor, which that really goes to show how much Iron Man has grown as a character. And that especially comes to fruition in that one scene where, if you've watched any amount of video essays, you've probably seen it, where Iron Man's like, if you're nothing but as a suit, then you shouldn't have it. And yes, that scene is really powerful. And the scene where Spider-Man realizes that in a later portion where he's able to pick up rubble that's on top of him, even though he doesn't have a Spider-Man suit, is really good. And not only that, but this movie is just really funny. I like how he interacts with his classmates, and especially his best friend, Ned. I'm going to put this movie at A tier because Spider-Man is freaking awesome, and they did him good justice in this reboot of live-action movies. So, good job, MCU. It took way too long. 2 movies not being good at all is just way too much for this character. And Thor Ragnarok, this is the exact direction we needed to take him, because they throw him inside of a grinder in this movie, and that's what he needs. That's what he needs as a character, to grow and develop. So in this one, his dad dies, and that creates the conflict, that being that his dad was holding Thor's sister in a cage by being alive, but now he's dead, so now she's gonna wreak havoc. And because she's much more powerful than him, he finally has a foe that is worth seeing Thor fight. And Jeff Goldblum's in it, so it's automatically A tier. Also, Hulk is in this one. I think the movie's funny. I like how they defeat the villain. It's not just a battle of power, it's a battle of wits. Secret battle of wits. And it's pretty cool. After all these years of mediocrity for Thor and his own standalone films, I'm glad to see that they finally kicked up the writing team into the sky high of Gear 12 and decided to write a good movie. This one is going into A tier with all of these movies. Good job, team. Good job. All right. So, Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame. Before we get on those, I'm going to tackle Ant-Man and the Wasp. I know Ant-Man and the Wasp comes after Avengers, Infinity War. This is what I was talking about earlier. But I think I have to talk about Infinity War and Endgame next to each other. And then just putting Ant-Man and the Wasp in between them would be really weird and a pace breaker. Especially since I have not much to say about Ant-Man and the Wasp, other than it continues to set up some quantum world stuff that I don't really care about, because as you can see from the movies I have left, I have not seen the next Ant-Man movie, so I really don't care about this movie too much. I think some of it is cool. I think a lot of the shrinking and growing aspects are cool, especially where they have cars and the little Hot Wheels thing, but they're actual real cars. That's kind of cool. But a lot of it is just so We'll put it in the C tier with the other Ant-Man movie. And now we have Infinity War and Endgame. If you're anyone who can be described as a human being on planet Earth that has watched these two movies, especially when they came out and now reflecting on it, there's probably some sense of bitterness towards Endgame that I can definitely see and understand. But let me just throw something out there. I think both of these movies are A tier. I like Endgame a tiny bit more, but I think Infinity War is also pretty good. Firstly, Infinity War proves to us how good writing can truly be when you meet up all these characters and give them one central villain to fight up against. And that is Thanos. So Thanos has a very interesting grasp on all the characters because he hurts all of them personally. Even though his logic is a bit flawed, I think the fact that he's able to have such a big impact that every single character has their own personal conflict with him is amazing. Not only is he so powerful that he's able to hurt everyone in this way, but he actually wins. Yes, you heard that right. The villain wins, and by winning, freaking everyone dies. And that scene where after he's gotten the super ultra powerful things and then snaps his fingers and then half of all life on the entire planet of Earth freaking dies. That's a pretty hard scene, you know? It goes so cold. This movie's all about failure. That's the central point of it. They all failed. Not just one of them, not just Chris Pratt because he freaking punched Thanos, but they all lost. And you could feel that hurt in the beginning of Endgame. And I think that kind of theme of failure and loss is what makes Endgame so impactful to me because that's a huge aspect of it. So yeah, in Endgame, a lot of the time travel stuff may be confusing. I think they messed up Thor's character pretty bad. Like, even though I think his reaction was pretty on par for someone in his shoes, and I would have liked to see that taken a lot more seriously than the way they actually handled it, I think Endgame is really cool. Aside from Thor, I think there's a lot of power behind the emotions that are shown in Endgame, especially with the time travel stuff. Aside from like the time travel logic itself, I think that part was done really well. Not only that, but I know the movie prioritizes more on spectacle than it does writing, but the spectacle is really cool, man. Okay, look, this is coming from somebody who one of their first MCU movies was Endgame, so watching this was not as insane for me as it was for other people, but every time I watch this movie, I'm amazed by the amount of things that they're able to pull off just because this is the last movie. And of course, who can forget the amazing third act of the movie that finally draws a conclusion to Iron Man's character. Ever since the ending of the first movie, he's always been about protecting the Earth from whatever unseen horrors lie beyond either the space or within Earth itself. And he's always been about protecting them in some way. And now that he's faced the greatest evil of all, at least until this point, Thanos, and he lost, it's kind of satisfying to see him finally put an end to the Thanos, even if it means that he has to sacrifice his own life because of that. Obviously, in my opinion, Iron Man is the best part of Endgame, but there's a lot of it that I just love watching over and over again. But I think that these two movies go great together in tandem, more so than apart. And that's why it's hard for me to have them apart or to distinguish them from one another because they just go so well together. If I'm watching Infinity War, I have to see what happens in Endgame, even though I already know what happens. So I'm going to put both of these movies in A tier. They make a great duo of movies. I know a lot of people don't like Endgame because it throws away some of the writing aspects from Infinity War, but I think there's a lot of greatness to it beyond that. So, now what? Phase 3 ended with Endgame. Did my interest with these movies just disappear? Well, yeah, pretty much. Except with Spider-Man. Like I said, Spider-Man is freaking awesome, bro. No matter how old I am, I can always relate to Spider-Man. Because, you know, he goes through so much, and yet it always feels so personal what he has to deal with. And that's why I continue to watch the two Spider-Man movies that came out after Endgame, even though I didn't watch anything else except for one, as you could see. But I digress. So, Far From Home. I think this was the first movie to come out, at least in the timeline after Endgame. What did I think of it? Did it meet up to my expectations? I'm happy to say Far From Home was good. I don't think it was great, but it was good. And that's better than what I could say from a lot of franchises that go on for so long. There are some aspects to Far From Home that I don't like. In particular, the end credits scene where we find out that some characters we've been following throughout the story are actually just alien mimics, which is scary. Not in the sense that, wait, that's not who we thought it was? Scary in the sense that, are they gonna retcon an ending just because it was actually an alien Like, what if Iron Man comes back because the one who sacrificed his life was just an alien? Which that's not a really great feeling to give somebody who's decided to watch the end credit scene. But aside from that, this movie's pretty fun. This movie doesn't have a lot of the same heart in it as Homecoming, but it's still fun to watch Peter and his friends talk to each other and stuff. Like, it's still nice to see him converse with Ned, his friend, and also the other guys. So it's still cool. I still like the interactions. Some of the fight scenes are cool, and Spider-Man is just a fun superhero in general. So I'm going to put this movie in B tier. However, before we get into the next movies, at the end of this one, Spider-Man's identity is revealed to the public, which is something he didn't want. Now they know that he's just some kid, and they know exactly who that kid is. And then we go straight into No Way Home. But before I can get there, I have to bring up some other movies, as you've probably already seen. So the way No Way Home works is that it's a multiverse saga, which you might think, oh no, and you're right, exactly. However, I think this one does something a little bit more special than the other movies. If you haven't seen it, you're about to see why, but I'd recommend you watch it for yourself. But before you watch it for yourself, there's some other movies you should probably know about, just so that some things that happen in that one make sense. And I'll be talking about those movies. So, these are the older Spider-Man live-action movies. We have the Sam Raimi trilogy and the Mark Webb. Okay, well, I didn't watch the second one, but I didn't really want to watch the second one just for this movie tier list, but I know what happened, so it's okay. Let's start off with the first live-action Spider-Man movie. I could be wrong, but this is a more popular one, so I'm just going to say that it's the first and pretend to believe me. Spider-Man, starring Tobey Maguire. Obviously, I think that the highlights of this movie are J. Jonah Jameson and Willem Dafoe, but it's a good movie. I like to see Peter Parker grow as a hero, even though I think it's a little bit contrived how Uncle Ben dies, which leads to Peter Parker becoming less selfish. But the rest of the movie makes up for it. It's just cool to see him learn his powers, to learn humility, I think, and then selflessness. That's probably a better word. But yeah, this movie's just good, I think. Yeah. I'm going to put it in B tier. I don't have a lot more to say about it, but it's a pretty good introduction to live-action Spider-Man. And then we have Spider-Man 2. Okay, look, I'm sorry. I get why people like this movie. I truly understand why. But there was flaws in this movie that I just couldn't get over. First off, I'd like to mention that in the first movie, there was this character known as Mary Jane, who is Peter Parker's love interest. But the story they want to tell with Mary Jane is just kind of weird. She's so mean to him, you know? I don't see what he sees in her, because she's just super mean to him, and every time he tries to be nice and honest, she just kind of puts him off. It just doesn't give me the idea that these two should be together. Not only that, but literally everyone else is also really mean to him. Some things I understand, like his professor keeps telling him, dude, you're late, you need to come to class, and I understand that because he is late, he needs to come to class. But just random people are mean to him for no reason. Like, he's trying to get into this play, and he's like 2 minutes late or something, and then the guy's like, you can't go in, or else you'll ruin the experience. And that's just like a completely contrived plot point to move the idea that he doesn't care about Mary Jane over, even though he literally showed up to the thing, was 2 minutes late, and then stayed out in the street the entire time waiting for her to come out. Look, I just think that they punch him too many times in this movie for literally no reason. Like, everyone is mean to him, and because everyone's mean to him, Mary Jane is mean to him. It's not cool, man. But on the other hand, I understand. In spite of all the terrible things that are happening that are completely nonsensical, it does drive home the themes and the story, which I do really like. It's a pretty mature theme to tackle in this movie, that even though he has his superpower, he still has other responsibilities, but he can't have all of them. And I think in some execution parts are really good, especially the scenes where he has to come to terms with that. And I think those are the most powerful parts of this movie, not the setup. The setup is very weak, and it is really frustrating to watch, but the payoff is amazing. So since those two things clash really hard together, unfortunately, I have to give this a C tier, because it's hard for me to appreciate the good parts of this movie when the bad parts really stick out. But I don't want that to take away from the movie, and I don't want to say it's a bad movie because of that. Okay, so Spider-Man 3 is a cash grab. So in this movie, there's 3 villains, and one of them is Peter Parker. Evil Peter with the symbiote is obviously the best part of the movie, where he does, the infamous dance thing. Other than that, this movie is just kind of whatever. It's not really that good. It feels all over the place. It's rushed. The ending action sequence is kind of cool, where he has to fight all of them and also save MJ, and then it's really confusing to watch because there's so many villains, there's so many plot points, there's a lot of things that happen, and there's hints of a good movie in there, but it was kind of just washed away by probably all the ideas that they had for maybe a Spider-Man 4, but they had to condense it all in this one movie, and it feels really confusing to watch. So I'm going to put this movie in D tier because it's not really enjoyable, but sorry. The Amazing Spider-Man. This is a different movie franchise by Mark Webb, starring Andrew Garfield, and I think a lot of people didn't like it when it came out. But now they both have a cult following, and I think the Amazing Spider-Man one is wholly underrated. They take Peter Parker in a much more interesting direction. Instead of like in the Sam Raimi trilogy, where when Uncle Ben dies, Peter Parker just becomes this selfless crime-fighting hero. In this one, when Uncle Ben dies, he doesn't immediately turn to his superhero powers as a good thing. In fact, I say he has a much more realistic reaction to that, being a teenager, where he becomes this vigilante, where he tries to find the guy who killed his uncle. So seeing him turn this way may turn off a couple of viewers because it's like, Peter Parker isn't like that. But I think it's a lot more interesting to have him react this way because it makes his transformation into a selfless crime-fighting hero that he will eventually become into a much more powerful scene. And all of this culminates in the bridge scene where he fights the lizard. Like the whole sequence is just, it's really beautiful, I have to say. I don't know how to describe what it feels like watching it, but it's just a really good scene. And then that being the thing that shows him how his powers give him responsibilities to save the day, that's pretty good. And I think it's fitting that he never actually catches the guy who kills Uncle Ben because it shows that maybe vengeance isn't always the thing that you're searching for. So yeah, this movie's just really good. I'm going to put it in A tier. So I haven't watched The Amazing Spider-Man 2 because a lot of people weren't saying it's good. But after watching the first one, I kind of wanted to see it for this movie tier list. But then I thought, if I'm going to watch this one for the tier list, then which ones am I not going to watch for the tier list? And I don't want to have to go into that whole thing. So I just chose not to watch it. But I know what happens in the end. And basically all you need to know, so spoiler alert, his love interest dies, and it's pretty much his fault. So that's all I'm going to say. So that comes into play with this movie, Spider-Man No Way Home. And maybe you're asking yourself, why did I need to go into all of that? It might be a little obvious because I explained some movies and that they're multiverses, but villains from the previous movies that I talked about show up in this movie. And not just the villains, but the Spider-Man. Yes, that's right. Tobey Maguire Spider-Man and Andrew Garfield Spider-Man show up in this movie to help Tom Holland Peter Parker with the Green Goblin, Dr. Octavius, the Sandman, I don't know who else, Lizard, Electro. I don't know if there was another one. I think the symbiote showed up in an end credit scene, but I don't know if another villain from Spider-Man 3 showed up because there's like 40 of them. But anyway, they all show up. Now he has to deal with them. So for clarity's sake, I'm going to refer to the MCU Spider-Man as Tom Holland or Tom. So for starters, it's a meetup film. It's a crossover. And that's really cool, I think. But it wouldn't hold a lot of weight if they were just showing up and spouting random lines at each other so that you can go, hey, I remember that. Which they do a little bit. And I have to say it is a little much like, okay, I get it. I'm a bit of a scientist myself. They just throw that line in there for just because they know it's a meme. But some of the other stuff they do in this movie where they have Tom Holland prove his responsibility is really good. All of these villains existing, they provide an avenue where Tom Holland has to prove his responsibility because he can't just kill them. He has to save them, or he tries to make them good again in order to change their fates. But I feel like where this movie really shines is in its third act. Because it's in this moment where Tom Holland finally experiences what the other Peter Parkers have. When everything goes awry and the Green Goblin shows how evil he truly is by killing Aunt May. And I have to say, in a retelling of a story where we know the uncle is going to die, and then having like their last words be, with power comes responsibility, and then hearing Aunt May say that was really good. That's a really good callback because you don't think they're ever going to kill her off. But then when she says that line, you're like, oh. And that's that's pretty cool. I like the way they wrote that. This movie is paced really well, especially when it comes to introducing Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, because they know when to bring them in and when to have them convey their wisdom and to just chit chat. By the way, I think the scenes where they're just bantering together is just really funny. Not only that, but we also get a little redemption arc for the other two Spider-Mans. Andrew Garfield gets to do the opposite of what he did in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and instead of not catching her, he caught her. It's pretty cool. And then Tobey Maguire, we get to see how much he's changed throughout his 3 movies, where in the first one, he was happily ready to kill the guy who he thinks shot his uncle. But now that he sees how much trouble revenge has caused him, when he sees Tom Holland about to go down the same route, he's the one to step in and prevent him from killing Green Goblin, which is pretty good. Now, my explanation of that kind of is a bit sparse because there's a lot of different moving parts in this action sequence. But I recommend that you watch this movie for yourself. Of course, it requires a lot of context to watch it. But even aside from that, I think it's a good movie. Not just a good movie. I think it was a really great movie, actually. When I watched it, it was my favorite MCU movie at the time. Almost my favorite superhero movie at the time, only to be outdone by like The Incredibles or something. So I put this movie in S tier because it is great in a lot of different ways. Yeah, this is my favorite MCU movie when I saw it. However, it's not anymore because Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 exists. We're going to end off today's ranking with this movie. I don't know what to say about this movie, except for the fact that I could really tell how much the director cared about his characters, but I'll give it my best shot. In this movie, we finally get the origin stories to a more so mysterious character in the MCU franchise, and that being Rocket Raccoon. Rocket was never really a character to say much about his past. He never explained it to even the other guys, despite being like lifelong friends, basically, or being his only friends. He never wanted to be a character that was broken down. But this movie forced it out of him, and it is brutal. So a lot of the movie is the rest of them trying to save Rocket, while we also get to see his past unfold, and it is really sad. But it really goes along with his character well. He always struggled with his own existence, and now we get to see why. And it's, I don't know, I've already said it a bunch, but it is incredibly depressing to see where he comes from and how he was treated. But it's kind of beautiful to see that he came from this horrible past, and yet intercut between that, we see these people risking their lives just trying to save him. It's a really good contrast between the two. And it's really nice to see him finally come to terms with that and be able to take down his tormentor, basically, for his entire life and all of his problems. It's just a beautiful movie, honestly. Everything about it is really good. I do have one complaint, though. It's that the guy who attacked him in the beginning, that's Adam Warlock, he's supposed to be an important part of this movie, I think, but they just kind of sidelined him for a little bit until it was really important, and I think they shouldn't have done that, but the movie's already long as it was, so I guess I can kind of see why. I just wish they'd done at least something with him, but it's a minor complaint. Overall, I think this movie is just really beautiful. Also, it's pretty funny too, because of course it's Guardians of the Galaxy. It's going to be really funny. The music choice is going to be really good. The camera shots are going to be really good. The choreography is going to be good. It's the best MCU movie. This is one of my favorite. It's going in S tier up here too. So that was a really good place to end off the MCU at. I haven't seen anything else past Endgame because they frankly haven't interested me that much. So that's where I'm going to end off the video. I hope that you... Yep, that's right. I'm not done yet today. I still got 11 movies left for you. I didn't think 26 movies was enough to hold up one video. I have to add more. So, we have 11 Scooby-Doo movies. This is the third biggest franchise of movies that I've seen. I don't know which one of them constituted as movies because there was a like whole summer where I watched a bunch of Scooby-Doo content. I couldn't tell if half of them were like half-hour specials or if they were full movies. So I've gathered a collection of all of the Scooby-Doo movies that I think I have seen. And here they are. Scooby-Doo Abracadabra-Doo. And this one, they go to check on Velma's little sister, and there's a big griffin that is out there terrorizing them, and they have to figure out who it is or what is causing the thing to appear. And I think this one was a little funny, but it's not really all that memorable, so I'm going to put this one in C tier. Scooby-Doo Mask of the Blue Falcon. And this one, they go to a Comic-Con style convention in order to meet the Blue Mask, which is their favorite superhero, I think. And then there's a bunch of bats everywhere, and they have to figure out who set the bats out. This one was pretty much kind of boring. It felt more like an advertisement for something that I've never seen before, so I'm going to put this one in D tier. Scooby-Doo and the Cyber Chase. In this one, they go inside the internet, and there's a lot of cool locations like this gladiator arena and prehistoric era type jungle place where they try to catch this cyber ghost who's terrorizing the internet, I think. There's a cool section where they're in this amusement park and they meet up with like a past version of the Scooby-Doo gang, but I feel like it kind of drags near the end in that section. So I'm going to put this one in C tier because it was mildly entertaining, but it kind of got a little long. Scooby-Doo and the Mystery Map. And this one, they're puppets, and they're trying to discover what's on the other side of this lighthouse. They're basically just following a map of treasure and then meeting a scary ghost on the way. It felt kind of like it was for an audience that is younger than me, so I didn't find it that interesting. I'm going to put this one in D tier. Scooby-Doo and a Lake Monster. This one is actually a live-action Scooby-Doo movie that isn't one of the live-action Scooby-Doo movies, which is kind of weird. So in this movie, there's a lake monster that comes out of nowhere, and they have to figure out who's summoning it, and it turns out it's a witch who is Velma. Yeah, Velma turns into a witch and becomes evil. Then they make her not evil at the end. The most interesting part of this movie is that before the end credits scene, there's a behind the scenes showcase, which was kind of interesting, but is probably the only noteworthy part of this movie. There's a lot of weird plot points where Shaggy tries to date Velma, but then they're like, oh, never mind. And I guess I appreciate them not doing that because they're just a gang of friends. But still, I don't know why they included that at all if they were just going to do that. So I'm going to put this one in C tier. Scooby-Doo and WrestleMania. So the entire time, they're trying to figure out who is responsible for disrupting the WrestleMania. It's ridiculous. If there's any Scooby-Doo movie that actually felt like a direct advertisement for something, it's this. So there's this one particular scene where the gang is being chased by this monster, and then it throws a big boulder at them, and then John Cena shows up, his theme starts playing, and then he picks up that boulder and throws it off a cliff. And he's like, I saved you guys. And they're like, yes, John Cena, I love you. That's just basically the whole movie. I don't think movie studios and writers should collaborate with these big corporations such as WrestleMania just to advertise their program in the form of a movie because it really ruins the source material. I really hope that we never see this ever again. All right, I'm going to put this movie in F tier and then move on. Scooby-Doo, Moon Monster Madness. I think this one is pretty interesting. In my opinion, it is actually the scariest Scooby-Doo movie out there because it focuses on the vast emptiness of space, and there's a lot of scenes that really portray that eeriness, especially when there's something that you don't know that's out there. It kind of gives off ocean vibes, but on space, which is pretty cool, actually. This is the best one so far. I'm going to put this one in A tier. Scooby-Doo and the Phantosaur. There is a ghost dinosaur that shows up, and the gang has to stop it. Of course, you might not remember it for that. Yep, this is the one. Shaggy becomes Ultra Instinct Shaggy. This is the one where he beats up all those biker gangs and does really cool parkour. And it is just as cool as it sounds. I'm going to put this one in B tier because it is pretty entertaining in that regard. Then we have Scooby-Doo and Kiss. And this is my favorite one because it feels like a whole trip. I don't want to give away what happens in this movie, but believe me, you are not ready. It is the most insane movie that I think I've probably ever seen in my entire life. That's all I'm going to say. Please watch it. If you're going to watch anything Scooby-Doo related, probably watch something else and then this. I'm going to put this one in A tier. Scooby-Doo, the live-action movie, the Scooby-Doo movie that a lot of you probably think of when you think of live-action Scooby-Doo movie. Not the Scooby-Doo and Lake Monster movie, but this one. This is mostly just a kind of funny movie without a noteworthy story. Not every joke hits, but enough of them hit for me to enjoy it, so I'm going to put this one in B tier. And then Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed. I think it's a bit funnier than the first one, and that is pretty much the only thing it has going for it. So I'm going to put this one also in B tier. I think it's a little better than the first one just because it's funnier. And with that, we are finally finished with part 2 of the movie tier list. I promise there's no surprise after this. You can check the timestamp. It's pretty short. So, sorry that it took so long for this part to come out. I just didn't feel like writing the script, but I feel a newfound motivation after the summer has ended and I'm no longer employed and I'm just in school. So, if you're new to the channel and you like videos like this coming out once every 7 months, then I'd recommend subscribing. Maybe even giving it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. So, this is Jim signing off. See you later. Later.